My name is Harold Mason, and I turned 76 this past spring, though my bones have felt older for at least a decade. Since my wife Loretta passed away 3 years ago, I have been living with my son, Jeremy, and his wife Mandy in their split-level ranch house in Oakwood, Ohio. It wasn't supposed to be permanent, just until I got my bearings, just until I adjusted. That was the word they used. Adjust. As if grief was a piece of furniture you could slide into place. Loretta died in her sleep, mercifully quick. The doctor said, although I've since come to resent that phrase. Nothing about it felt merciful. She had made her favorite roast chicken the night before and had kissed me good night with her usual tired affection. And in the morning, I found her cold and gone. That moment cleaved my life into before and after. Everything that has followed has been part of the after, a slow, aching echo. I gave up our little 2-bedroom house on Primrose Lane because I couldn't stand the emptiness. Every room held her voice, her laugh, her smell. I told myself I didn't need the space, that it made sense to live with family, that I would be a help to them, and they would be a comfort to me. I brought only a few things with me. My recliner, my photo albums, and Loretta's crocheted blanket, the one she used to drape over her knees on chilly evenings. Jeremy and Mandy cleared out the guest room, painted it a neutral grey, and said I could make it mine. But it never really became mine. The closet already held Mandy's off-season clothes, and the dresser was half filled with miscellaneous electronics. I hung a few photos on the wall, Loretta and I on our honeymoon in Lake George, Jeremy as a toddler in overalls, my retirement party from the school district. But they looked like artifacts in a museum of a life no one remembered but me. My days settled into a quiet pattern. I would wake early, as I always have, make myself a cup of instant coffee, and take a short walk around the neighborhood if my knees allowed it. I'd nod at the same joggers and dog walkers, none of whom ever stopped to chat. I'd return to the house, careful not to make noise, and spend most of the day in my room reading old westerns or watching game shows. Sometimes I'd sit in the backyard if the weather was good, listening to the rustle of the wind in the maple trees, pretending I still had a garden to tend to. Jeremy works long hours in IT. He's always in some Zoom call or glued to 3 monitors in the basement. Mandy is a nutritionist who runs her own coaching business from home. She says she specializes in resetting people's relationship with food, though I've never asked her what that means. The only regular interaction we have is at dinner, which is always at 6 sharp. They eat clean, lots of kale, quinoa, and grilled fish. They prepare a separate plate for me. Steamed vegetables, small portions of white meat, very little salt. I'm diabetic, yes, but I've been managing it for over 20 years. Loretta was always careful with our meals, but she never treated me like a burden. Jeremy is distant, but not cruel. He greets me in the morning with a distracted, "Hey, Dad," and sometimes asks if I need anything when he goes to the store. He is a man of few words, just like his grandfather. He has grown into someone I respect but don't understand, the way men become strangers to their fathers when careers and mortgages replace fishing trips and Saturday projects. Mandy, on the other hand, is harder to read. She was kind at first, overly kind, I think, the way people are when they're trying to earn something. She made my bed the first few mornings, brought me herbal teas, asked about Loretta as if she truly cared. But within weeks, her tone began to shift. Her sentences shortened, her compliments stopped. She began to sigh when I asked the second time what day of the week it was, and she started knocking before entering the room, even when the door was open. Once I found a note on the fridge. "Please don't eat the yogurt. It's for a client." I felt like a child being told off at school. The house itself doesn't welcome me. It's a modern space. Open floor plan, granite countertops, those tall bar stools I can barely climb onto. The TV is always playing something loud and unrecognizable. I miss the quiet of my own home, the rhythm Loretta and I had built, the Sunday crossword, the way she folded towels in thirds, her humming when she cleaned. There are no routines here, only schedules, apps, deliveries. Sometimes, when I stand too long in the hallway, I feel like a ghost walking through a life that doesn't remember it ever needed me. My presence feels tolerated, not wanted. I try not to be a burden. I keep my space clean. I do my laundry. I ask for very little. But lately, I've noticed the small ways in which I'm being edged out. Subtle, polite rejections masquerading as concerns. Maybe you should rest instead of coming to the store, Dad. Do you want me to remind you to take your meds again? Should you really be having toast at this hour? There is an unspoken line in the house, and I have learned not to cross it. I don't enter the kitchen unless invited. I don't change the thermostat. I don't watch television in the living room unless no one else is home. I don't speak unless spoken to. I've become a shape that moves silently from one part of the house to another. The only person I speak to freely is my sister Dorothy, who calls from California every Sunday at 2 p.m. sharp. She's 10 years younger and full of that stubborn vitality I lost long ago. She tells me about her garden, about her bridge club, about her grandchildren. She asks if I'm happy, and I lie. Of course, I say, they're taking good care of me. But even Dorothy is beginning to hear something in my voice. Last week she asked, "Are they letting you eat enough?" I laughed it off, told her I was watching my diet. But the truth is, I do get hungry. Not for food, exactly, but for attention, for kindness, for someone to say, "I remember who you were." Some nights I sit in bed with the lights off, holding Loretta's blanket to my chest, whispering things I never said when she was alive. I tell her I miss her. I tell her I don't know what's happening to me. I tell her I feel like I'm shrinking. I feel like a man fading into wallpaper, erased one polite correction at a time. No one yells, no one hits, but the silence is heavy and full of rejection. It's a careful kind of cruelty, one that comes dressed in the language of concern, one that makes you doubt your own instincts. I think that's what hurts the most, not knowing whether I'm being unfair or if they really have begun to turn against me. There's a difference between being helped and being handled, and I've started to realize that I am no longer being helped. I am being managed. Tomorrow, Mandy is bringing home a new, smart fridge. She says it has a tracking system and calorie monitor. She says it's going to help us all eat more mindfully. She says it's going to lock automatically after 8 p.m. I nodded when she told me. I nodded like a man does when he's already lost the argument. But inside, I felt something crack. Not rage. No, something quieter, something more dangerous, a recognition. They are no longer pretending. They want control, and they will get it, one locked door at a time. The morning the fridge arrived, Mandy was already bustling around the kitchen before I had even finished my coffee. She was wearing her usual form-fitting workout gear, hair tied back in a tight ponytail, tapping away on her tablet with that nervous, purposeful energy she always carried when something new was about to be implemented in the house. Jeremy, as usual, was in the basement on a conference call, his voice barely audible through the floorboards, muttering about firewalls and data migration. I sat in the corner of the dining area, nursing my lukewarm decaf, and watching as Mandy opened drawers and rearranged things like she was preparing for a military inspection. The old fridge, white, slightly dented, humming like an old cat, stood unplugged by the back door, already defrosting, its insides bare. "They're installing it today," she said without looking at me, her tone clipped. "Should only take a couple of hours." I nodded and said nothing, not wanting to get in the way. Mandy had started using that brisk, overly calm voice with me more and more lately, the one that said she was talking to someone who didn't quite understand how the world worked anymore. That voice always made me feel like I was already in a home. Not a home, but the home. The kind with wheelchairs in the hallway and laminated menus and call buttons clipped to the side of beds. The delivery men arrived just after 9. 2 young guys, both full of energy and sweat, hauling in a tall, sleek, black refrigerator that looked more like a sculpture than an appliance. It had a glossy surface that reflected everything in distorted shapes, and a narrow touch-screen panel down the center like a futuristic vault. Mandy hovered as they installed it, checking serial numbers, asking questions about app integration and Wi-Fi connection speeds. One of the men joked that this fridge was smarter than most people, and Mandy laughed, too loudly. I watched from the edge of the room, sipping the dregs of my coffee, trying to stay invisible. When they were gone, and the fridge was humming quietly in its new home, Mandy stood in front of it with her hands on her hips, admiring it the way one might admire a new car or an expensive piece of art. "It's beautiful," she said to no one in particular, then turned to me with a forced smile. "It's going to make things a lot easier around here." At dinner, Jeremy explained it in more detail. "It's got portion tracking, calorie logging, and we can set custom access schedules. We can even program it to restrict certain foods." He said it like it was a marvel, like they had installed a miracle worker in the kitchen. Mandy chimed in. "It's not a punishment, Harold. It's a tool. With your diabetes, we just want to make sure you're staying safe. No more midnight snacks, okay?" I felt the heat rise in my face, but forced a smile. "I haven't had a midnight snack in years," I said. But Mandy gave me that look again. Half sympathy, half condescension, and nodded like I had just confirmed her fears. "Well, just in case," she said. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual, feeling restless. My sleep had been shallow, interrupted by dreams I couldn't quite remember. I made my way to the kitchen and was met with an unexpected surprise. The fridge door wouldn't open. I pulled again, then noticed the glowing message on the small touchscreen. "Access restricted until 7:30 a.m. I checked the clock. It was 6:12. I stood there for a long moment, hand still on the handle, unsure whether to laugh or curse. It wasn't just a fancy fridge, it was a locked gate. I turned around and went back to my room, my stomach growling softly, the taste of sour realization already forming in my mouth. This wasn't about health. This was about control. As the days passed, the implications of the new appliance unfolded with a slow, suffocating clarity. Every item in the fridge was now digitally catalogued. When I took a yogurt one afternoon, a soft chime rang out, and Mandy's voice came from the living room. "Dad, make sure you log that, okay?" I looked around, bewildered, and saw the new camera in the corner. Tiny, discreet, like a smoke detector, but pointed straight at the kitchen. I didn't remember anyone saying anything about surveillance. Later that evening, Mandy showed me the app on her phone. It listed every item I had touched that day: milk, yogurt, a banana, and assigned them each a calorie count and a time stamp. "It's really helping us understand your patterns," she said, like I was some kind of research subject. "We can intervene before anything gets out of hand." I wanted to ask what out of hand looked like. A piece of pie? A second helping of rice? But I bit my tongue. It got worse. One night I woke from a nightmare, Loretta falling, unreachable, calling my name, and stumbled into the kitchen, needing water, needing something. The fridge was locked again. I stared at the screen. "Access restricted. Please try again later." I opened the cabinet and found nothing but dry oats and protein powder. The faucet worked, at least. I drank and sat in the dark, my head resting against the cool surface of the new machine, feeling like a thief in my own home. The next morning, Mandy sat me down with Jeremy at the dining table. She had printed charts, graphs. "We've noticed some inconsistencies in your eating patterns, Harold," she said gently. "You've been snacking between meals more than we anticipated." Jeremy nodded. "It's not about blame, Dad. We just want to make sure you're not overdoing it. We're all trying to be healthier, right?" I nodded slowly, though I wasn't sure what I was agreeing to. That afternoon, they installed a lock on the pantry cabinet. It clicked loudly when it engaged, a tiny metallic finality. I stood in front of it for a full minute, hand hovering over the knob, not even hungry, just bewildered. The note attached to the door read, "For your safety." I went back to my room and stared at Loretta's blanket for a long time. I felt the kind of hollow that comes not from hunger, but from erasure, from being reduced to a list of behaviors and intakes, from becoming a liability. Later that week, I overheard Mandy talking to a friend on the phone in the kitchen. "It's like having a toddler, honestly. I have to monitor everything. He'll eat junk if I let him. I mean, I get it. He's old, he doesn't know better. But it's exhausting." Her voice was bright, casual, like she was discussing a pet that had peed on the rug. I stood just out of view, back pressed against the hallway wall, fists clenched. I wanted to storm in and tell her I was still here, still lucid, still capable, but I didn't. I waited until she left, then walked slowly into the kitchen, placed my hand on the fridge handle again, and found it locked. Of course it was. I stared at my warped reflection in its glossy surface, a pale, tired ghost of a man who used to know who he was. The true breaking point came one afternoon when Dorothy called. I took the call in the backyard, sitting under the skeletal maple tree that used to bring Loretta so much joy in the spring. Dorothy asked if I was eating well. I hesitated too long. "They're trying to help," I said eventually, but my voice cracked on the last word. Dorothy was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Harold, what are they doing to you?" I didn't answer, just closed my eyes against the wind and listened to the rustle of leaves that didn't rustle quite the same anymore. That evening, Mandy informed me that from now on, I'd need to check with her before taking anything from the fridge outside of mealtimes. "It's just a precaution," she said, smiling. "You forget sometimes, and it's better this way." I opened my mouth to object, to remind her that I had lived through war, through hardship, through years of driving that yellow school bus across snow-covered roads without incident. But the words didn't come. Instead, I nodded. Again, just like every other time. But inside, something shifted. A weight that had been pressing down on me for weeks began to melt, not into sadness, but into something sharper. Not quite anger. Not yet, but close. A kind of clarity. A sense that whatever was happening here had passed the line between concern and quiet cruelty. They thought they were helping. Or maybe they didn't. Maybe help had never been the point. Maybe this was never about food. Maybe they were hungry for something else entirely. Power, control, or simply the comfort of knowing I couldn't get in their way. Whatever it was, it had nothing to do with yogurt or toast or sodium intake. And I knew, as I lay in bed that night, staring into the dark, that I would not allow it to go on forever. Something had to change. Because if I didn't act soon, I would disappear completely. Not die, just fade. And that, to me, was a far crueler fate than death. A few days after that last conversation with Mandy about food access, something subtle but unmistakable shifted in the air of the house. There was no single event, no dramatic explosion, but a quiet, methodical tightening, as if an invisible hand was slowly closing around my neck, testing how much pressure I could endure before reacting. They stopped asking if I wanted to join them for dinner, and soon they stopped informing me altogether. One evening, I came down at my usual time only to find the table cleared, plates in the dishwasher, and the lights in the kitchen already dimmed. I stood there in silence, staring at the empty room, before quietly making myself a bowl of dry cereal with the remaining milk from the guest fridge in the garage. Mandy had said it was for backup use only, emergencies or unexpected guests, but I figured hunger after being forgotten might qualify as both. Still, I felt guilty, like I had stolen from someone else's pantry. I ate alone in the darkened living room, the television silent, the shadows longer than usual, and I realized with a kind of stunned detachment that I was no longer part of the family routine. I was now an afterthought. A week later, I woke up to find a new printed schedule taped to the fridge. It had food access rules in bold letters at the top and listed various time slots for meals and snacks, with specific items allowed in each. There was a small note at the bottom, handwritten in Mandy's elegant print, "For Harold's health." I stared at it for a long time before walking away. That same day I overheard Mandy on another call in her office, her voice hushed but firm. "He's pushing back a little, yeah. Some resistance. But I expected it. He's not dangerous, just stubborn. And it's not like he's going anywhere." I didn't know who she was speaking to, maybe a colleague, maybe some kind of elder care advisor, but what struck me most wasn't her condescension. It was the certainty, the conviction in her voice that I was a man to be managed, not reasoned with, a figure to be reshaped until I no longer resembled a threat, not even to myself. The real humiliations began subtly, embedded in small daily interactions. One afternoon I reached for a leftover chicken breast on the bottom shelf and heard Mandy call out from the other room, "That's not in your window, Harold." I froze, hand halfway to the Tupperware. "Put it back, please." Her voice was pleasant but firm, like a preschool teacher correcting a child who had grabbed an extra cookie. I put the chicken back. The next day, the fridge was reprogrammed to only unlock for me during predetermined intervals. The touchscreen would flash my name when I approached, and if it was not my designated time, it would display a simple message: "Access denied. Please consult your caregiver." My caregiver. That word landed like a slap. I had never needed a caregiver in my life. Not after my heart scare 10 years ago, not after Loretta died, not even when I had slipped on the ice and broken my wrist in 2006. I had managed. Always. One morning, I woke up dizzy and sweating, a telltale signal that my blood sugar had dropped during the night. I reached for the glucose tablets I always kept in my drawer. Gone. I shuffled towards the kitchen, fingers numb, and found the fridge locked, the screen blinking red. I knocked on Mandy and Jeremy's door, half delirious. Mandy answered, hair tangled, face annoyed. "Harold, it's 4 a.m. "What is it?" I told her I was hypoglycemic. She sighed, clearly irritated, and went to get me something. But not before muttering, "This is exactly why we need structure." That night, she moved my emergency glucose into a box above the sink, out of reach unless I asked. "Just in case you get confused," she said. I didn't argue. My hands were still shaking. Then came the jokes. At first, they were subtle, wrapped in sarcasm. During a Sunday dinner I hadn't been invited to, I overheard Jeremy chuckling as he said, "Better keep an eye on the pie or Dad might raid it after lights out." Mandy laughed. "Too bad the fridge doesn't have a shock function." I was upstairs, but the vent carried sound well, and their voices rang out with clarity. I sat on the edge of my bed for a long time, the blanket bunched in my fists. Later that week, Connor, my 19-year-old grandson, came over to visit. He barely acknowledged me, eyes glued to his phone, earbuds in place like armor. I made a comment about his new haircut, trying to bridge the gap. He looked up, smirked, and said, "Cool, thanks, Grandpa." "Been doing any late-night fridge raids lately?" Mandy giggled from the kitchen. "Don't tease him, honey," she said with no real conviction. Connor shrugged. "I'm just saying, we should put a bell on him." After that, I stopped going downstairs in the evenings. I stayed in my room, listening to old jazz on a tinny Bluetooth speaker, pretending that the music filled the spaces that food and warmth used to occupy. Sometimes, I would find myself staring out the window at the neighbor's house, watching the soft glow of their kitchen as a woman, maybe in her 60s, set the table for dinner, her husband passing her utensils, their silhouettes moving in a rhythm I remembered from my life with Loretta. I'd sit there until the cold crept in through the glass, trying to imagine what it felt like to be needed, welcomed, loved. Then came the food diary. Mandy handed it to me like a gift. "This is going to help us stay on track," she said. "Just jot down what you eat, when, and how you felt afterward. We'll review it weekly." I opened the little leather-bound book and stared at the empty pages. It felt like homework, like punishment. But I wrote in it. I wrote, 1 banana, 8 a.m. I felt invisible. Half turkey sandwich, 12:15 p.m. I felt ashamed. I never showed them those entries. Instead, I copied what I thought they wanted to see. Simple lists, obedient entries. They never looked closely. I doubt they cared about the details. They only wanted proof that I was compliant. One day I tried to talk to Jeremy. We were alone in the garage, and I asked if he thought things had gone too far. He looked up from his laptop, confused. "What do you mean?" I gestured to the house. The locks, the cameras, the rules. "I don't feel like I live here anymore." He blinked, then looked away. "It's for your health, Dad. You know that. Mandy's been working hard on all this. She reads a lot of studies. And honestly, you haven't exactly been taking care of yourself." That last sentence hit harder than he realized. Not because it was true, but because he believed it was. That was the moment I realized he had already crossed over. He no longer saw me as a man, a father, a husband in mourning. He saw me as a patient, a variable in Mandy's health equation. He saw what she saw. Soon after, Mandy rearranged the kitchen completely. She moved all the dishes I used to a lower cabinet, so you don't have to reach. She replaced my fork with a plastic one, saying the metal made my hands tremble. She pured my vegetables one night for easier digestion. I had no input. I had no say. And when I tried to resist, when I pushed back and asked why I wasn't allowed to serve myself anymore, Mandy responded not with anger, but with that sickening smile, the kind that cloaked contempt in faux compassion. "It's just easier this way, Harold, for all of us." One night, I found a slice of cheese wrapped in a napkin in my coat pocket. I didn't remember putting it there. I sat on the edge of my bed, unwrapped it slowly, and ate it with trembling fingers. It was cold, dry, flavorless, but it tasted like rebellion, like memory, like something real. Afterward I cried, not because I was sad, but because I had forgotten what it felt like to make a decision without permission. That night I began to plan. Nothing grand or dramatic, just a small decision. I would begin keeping my own records, not food, not calories, but truth. A journal hidden beneath the false bottom of my dresser drawer. I wrote down everything. The fridge schedule, the surveillance camera, Mandy's comments, Jeremy's indifference, Connor's mocking. Not out of spite, but out of preservation. If they were going to treat me like a shadow, I would be my own witness. I would remember for myself, because it was becoming clear that no one else would. It was a Wednesday afternoon when everything truly shifted, when my suspicions, long simmering beneath layers of doubt and self-blame, were finally confirmed in a way so stark it left no room for excuses. Jeremy and Mandy had gone out for what they called a wellness day, a midweek ritual that involved massages, cold-pressed juices, and silent yoga. Connor was supposed to drop by and check on me, but he never showed. I didn't mind. The house was unusually quiet, and I felt a kind of cautious relief, as if the air itself had loosened its grip around me. I took the opportunity to do a little tidying up, partly from boredom, partly to feel some sense of usefulness. I decided to change the linens in the guest bedroom, once Loretta's sewing room, now used mostly for storage. As I opened the top drawer of the old desk, I noticed a file folder slightly out of place, its corner sticking out like a flag. I pulled it open, expecting receipts or insurance forms, and instead found something far more damning: printouts from my bank. At first I thought it must be a mistake. The statements showed recent withdrawals I hadn't made, 2 $500 debits spaced 2 weeks apart, both marked from the same ATM across town. Then, more alarmingly, there were notes of transfers. 1,000 here, 2,000 there, all marked as care-related expenses sent to an account under Mandy's name. I sat down hard in the old armchair by the window, the folder trembling in my lap. My name was on the account. Loretta had added me to it years ago for her life insurance. We kept it separate, a cushion for emergencies. I had never touched it after she died. And yet here it was, being drained in increments, dressed up as caretaking. I spent the rest of the afternoon rummaging through drawers, shelves, cabinets, any place I might have once considered off-limits, but now realized was fair territory. In Mandy's office I found a binder labeled Future Planning. Inside were notes from meetings with estate planners, power of attorney documents partially filled out, and a checklist written in Mandy's handwriting that made my stomach knot. It read, Step 1, monitor behavior patterns. Step 2, document forgetfulness episodes. Step 3, consult doctor for cognitive review. Step 4, apply for durable guardianship. My name was scribbled in the margins. The date at the top was 3 months old. I stared at it, stunned by the clinical precision, by the language that stripped me of personhood. I wasn't a father-in-law or even a tenant. I was an impending legal process. I stood in the middle of the room, breath caught somewhere between fury and heartbreak. They weren't just locking the fridge or tracking my snacks. They were building a case, a silent, calculated campaign to render me legally irrelevant. And worst of all, they had been doing it under the guise of love. Of course, Mandy always said, "This is for your health." Of course, Jeremy nodded and mumbled about safety. It had all sounded so reasonable until the moment I saw my life summarized in a bulleted list. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in my bed with the binder on my lap, pages fanned out like a map of betrayal, and tried to understand where it all began. Maybe it was when Loretta died. Maybe when I gave them access to that account. Maybe it had always been there, dormant, a kind of practical opportunism masked as concern. I didn't know. But I knew what I felt now. Not sadness, not yet. What I felt was clarity. For the first time in years, I knew I wasn't imagining it. I wasn't being paranoid. I was being prepared for removal. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done since moving in with them. I called my bank. I asked to speak to Eleanor, the same manager who had helped Loretta and me for decades. When she heard my voice, she sounded surprised, almost relieved. "Mr. Mason," she said, "I was hoping you'd call. There have been some unusual activities on the account you share with your late wife." I confirmed my suspicions. Mandy had added herself as a secondary administrator without notifying me. Eleanor offered to freeze the account temporarily until I could come in. I thanked her, and for the first time in weeks, I smiled. But that was just the beginning. I knew I had to play my role a little longer. If Mandy and Jeremy were so invested in seeing me as incapable, I would let them continue. I ate their tasteless meals, nodded at their comments, wrote fake entries in my food diary, and kept my true journal hidden beneath the loose floorboard in my closet. Every entry was detailed, time-stamped, written in the same neat script I used when I was filling out bus route logs. I catalogued everything: when they locked the fridge, what they said about me when they thought I couldn't hear, what documents I found, what accounts were touched. It was all there, a record, a defense. But more than defense, it became something else, a promise to myself that I would not go quietly. They could manipulate, isolate, belittle, but they could not erase me. Not as long as I remembered who I was, not as long as I had proof. I wasn't just documenting their control, I was reclaiming mine. That week, Mandy mentioned a consultation she scheduled for me with a specialist, a geriatric therapist. "Just to check in," she said sweetly. "It's routine." I agreed, cheerfully. But I also made a second call, to Dorothy. I told her everything. For a long time she didn't speak. Then, finally, in a voice tight with anger and sorrow, she said, "Harold, you're coming to stay with me." I told her not yet. That I needed a little more time, that I needed to finish what I had started. "Then I'm coming to you," she said, and hung up before I could argue. That night, I made myself a sandwich, peanut butter and jelly, cut diagonally the way Loretta used to do it. I ate it slowly, alone, the way I had eaten all my meals lately. But this time, it didn't taste like defeat. It tasted like resistance, like memory, like something mine. The morning Dorothy arrived, the house was filled with the sterile silence of avoidance. I hadn't told Mandy or Jeremy she was coming, hadn't warned them, hadn't asked permission, hadn't even hinted. I'd called her 3 nights before, my voice steady, calm, but edged with something unfamiliar. Resolve. She'd said nothing at first, just listened. Then came the quiet assurance, her voice like an anchor. "I'm driving in." No arguments. "You're not facing this alone." She made the trip from California over 2 days, stopping only for gas and short naps. When she finally pulled into the driveway in her pale blue Camry, I watched from my upstairs window, heart pounding, a trembling in my hands that had nothing to do with age. She stepped out of the car like a storm contained in a petite woman's frame. Sharp eyes, wind-chapped cheeks, grey hair pinned in a loose bun. She walked to the front door with a purpose that didn't falter. Mandy opened the door before she could knock. They must have seen her coming. I couldn't hear their words at first, just the tones. Mandy's clipped and surprised, Dorothy's firm, deliberate. I came down the stairs halfway through their exchange and caught only the tail end. Dorothy saying, "Whether you like it or not, I'm staying for a few days. Harold needs a witness." Mandy blinked, then forced a smile so tight I could see the muscle twitch in her jaw. "Of course, family is always welcome." She turned to me. "You didn't tell us she was coming." "No," I replied simply. I didn't. That evening, the house was tense in a new way. Mandy still plated my dinner separately, still dictated the salt content, still placed the food diary at my seat like a ritual, but now she did it all under the sharp gaze of Dorothy, who sat beside me with a pen in hand and a small notebook of her own. Jeremy avoided the kitchen entirely, claiming a late meeting. Connor didn't show up that week. Mandy kept smiling, kept speaking in soft, measured tones, but her control was cracked. I could see it in the way she over-explained everything, in how often she mentioned routine and balance, how she carefully worded every sentence with legal precision. She was no longer speaking just to me. She was documenting herself for a witness. Dorothy spent the next 2 days quietly observing. She asked simple questions at dinner. "Why is the fridge locked?" What's the purpose of this tracking system? Has Harold ever expressed confusion or memory loss? Mandy's answers were always the same. It's for his safety. He's forgetful sometimes. We're just being cautious. Dorothy nodded, wrote notes, said nothing. But I knew her. Every note was a nail in a coffin Mandy hadn't realized she was building. On the third evening, I woke up to the sound of raised voices downstairs. I slipped out of bed and crept toward the hallway, where the vent carried sound clearly. Dorothy's voice was low but cutting. I've reviewed the account statements. You've taken money that wasn't yours and labeled it care expenses. That's theft, Mandy. Mandy's voice cracked. I was trying to offset the cost of his needs, medical supplies, dietary changes, my time. Then you should have asked, Dorothy replied. You don't isolate a man, restrict his food, tamper with his finances, and call it caregiving. That's abuse. Silence. Then Jeremy's voice, tight and defensive. We didn't do anything wrong. We've followed guidelines, consulted professionals. He's not the same anymore. No, Dorothy said, her tone ice. You're not. You're not the same son your father raised. I returned to my bed before they saw me, heart pounding, sweat cold against my back. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat up rereading my journal, pages of names, dates, comments, small humiliations, and major breaches of trust. I thought about everything that had led to this moment. The yogurt rationing, the locked cabinets, the way Mandy would pat my hand and say, "Good job, Harold." Like I was a toddler who had remembered not to spill his juice. I thought about Jeremy, how quiet he'd been, how complicit. My own son, who had once sat on my shoulders to watch 4th of July fireworks, who cried when I left for night shifts, who asked me to teach him how to shave. When had he stopped seeing me as a father and started seeing me as a problem? The following morning, I found my food diary gone. In its place was a new notebook, spiral-bound, with color-coded tabs. Mandy greeted me with a rehearsed smile. We've updated the format. This one's easier to track trends. There's even a mood section now. Isn't that great? She waited, pen poised as I stared at the book like it was a test I hadn't studied for. I picked it up, flipped to the first page. Section 1, breakfast, time, contents, calories, mood. I wrote slowly. Time, 7:30. Contents, air. Calories, 0. Mood, condescended. Mandy read over my shoulder and frowned. That's not funny. Wasn't trying to be, I replied. That was the first time I'd said something back in weeks. It felt like stepping onto ice and finding it held. That day, Dorothy insisted we go out for lunch. Just the two of us. Fresh air, she said. Unsupervised. I didn't argue. As we drove, she glanced at me and asked, You ready to leave? I hesitated. Almost. What are you waiting for? Something specific? I said. Something they don't expect. When we returned home, Mandy was waiting in the driveway. We were worried, she said with thinly veiled panic. You didn't tell us you were leaving. Dorothy held up her phone. Texted the house line. No one answered. Mandy didn't reply. She looked at me, searching for something. Guilt, remorse, submission, but found nothing. I walked past her into the house, calm. That evening, I slipped into Jeremy's office while they were watching television. I found what I was looking for in his email drafts, a letter addressed to the court, a guardianship petition. Due to concerning behavioral inconsistencies and an ongoing pattern of confusion and poor self-care, we believe Harold Mason is no longer capable of managing his financial or health decisions independently. It was dated a week ago. I printed it. I didn't confront them. Not yet. Instead, I called my attorney the next morning, a man named Lionel Frost, who had once helped Loretta and me with our wills. I sent him the journal, the bank documents, the binder I'd found, and now the guardianship draft. He called me back within hours. "This is solid, Harold. Do you want to pursue charges?" "Not yet," I said. "I want leverage first. Then I want freedom." That afternoon, I unplugged the fridge. It chirped once in protest and went dark. When Mandy discovered it, she screamed. "What did you do?" She barked. "You could have spoiled everything in there." I shrugged. "Didn't need permission to turn it on when we bought it. Don't need permission to turn it off." Jeremy intervened, holding her back. "Let's calm down." "No," she hissed. "He's trying to sabotage everything we built." That word, built, sat in my ears like poison. Built what? A fortress of control? The final straw came 3 days later. I woke up to find the locks on my door changed. My bedroom, once my last sanctuary, was now accessible only with their fingerprint scanner. Mandy said it was for monitoring health overnight. She used phrases like wandering risk, like elder nocturnal disorientation. I said nothing. I didn't need to. Dorothy had filmed it. That evening while they slept, I packed. Not everything. Just my journals, my documents, the photo of Loretta and me from our 40th anniversary, and the blue wool sweater she'd knit in the final year of her life. I left the food diary on the kitchen counter with a note inside. Mood. Resolved. At 3:45 a.m., Dorothy and I pulled out of the driveway. I didn't look back. Not once. But leaving wasn't enough. I had no intention of vanishing quietly. They wanted me powerless, voiceless, erased. They wanted to rewrite my history and absorb my future. They'd taken money, dignity, independence, and they were just getting started. So I did what they never expected. I fought back, not with fists or rage, but with facts, with legal filings, with letters sent to elder protection agencies, with recorded conversations, with notarized statements. 2 weeks later, Jeremy and Mandy received notice of the pending lawsuit and the formal request to reverse all power of attorney documentation. Their bank accounts were frozen for investigation. Their credit cards flagged. Dorothy's lawyer filed an injunction preventing them from claiming any further access to my finances. Mandy tried calling. Jeremy sent an email. "Let's talk. We can fix this." I never responded. Instead, I watched from Dorothy's living room as my name was cleared, my assets returned, and the guardianship petition dismissed with prejudice. The judge stated plainly, "There is no evidence of incompetence. There is, however, strong evidence of coercion, undue influence, and financial exploitation." It should have felt like victory, but it didn't. Not yet. I'd won a battle, yes, but something had broken permanently. Not just trust, not just the illusion of family, something in my sense of safety, of belonging. They had not just tried to control me, they had tried to erase me, and I would carry the echo of that attempt for the rest of my days. The day I walked into the attorney's office to sign the final documents was bright, unusually so for early March in Ohio. The sun poured through the tall windows like a silent witness, indifferent to the history being written at the polished mahogany desk before me. Lionel sat across from me in a crisp charcoal suit, glasses low on his nose, papers aligned with a mathematician's precision. He explained everything again, not because I didn't understand, but because he knew the value of ritual, the importance of hearing the same words once more before crossing the final threshold. I had listened carefully the first time, my financial autonomy reinstated, the fraudulent withdrawals being investigated, and the civil suit against Jeremy and Mandy set to proceed if they failed to comply with the return of funds and public apology. Lionel asked me if I was ready. I didn't speak for a moment. I looked at the pen in my hand, at the papers awaiting my signature, and then at the small brass plate on Lionel's desk. Integrity before all. A platitude, maybe, but today it felt earned. I signed every line slowly, deliberately, feeling each stroke carve something final into the air around me. When the last signature dried, Lionel leaned back and said, "It's done, Harold." But it wasn't. Not yet. Back at Dorothy's, I sat alone in the guest room, the door closed, the legal documents resting in a neat folder on the nightstand. I felt no euphoria, no catharsis. What I felt was pressure, coiled in my chest like a spring that hadn't yet unlatched. Justice on paper didn't erase the nights I'd stared at a locked fridge in the dark, or the mornings I'd sat at a table where no one spoke my name. It didn't unmake the feeling of being studied, corrected, corralled. I had taken everything back, my rights, my money, my story. But what I hadn't yet done was speak. Not to them, not with clarity. I had left them letters and legal orders, but I had not stood in front of them and said plainly, "You hurt me, you crossed a line, and I will never see you the same way again." The opportunity came unexpectedly. Dorothy received a voicemail while I was in the kitchen pouring myself coffee. Black, hot, just how I liked it. No permission required. The message was from Jeremy. His voice was raw, sleep-deprived, heavy. He said they wanted to meet. No lawyers. Just us. Just Dad and me and Mandy, please. I told Dorothy I'd go. She offered to come with me to wait outside, but I said no. Some things a man must do on his own. They chose a neutral spot, a diner just off Route 15, the kind with pleather booths and slow fans that creaked overhead. I arrived first and sat in the back corner, watching the door. When they entered, I saw what time had done to them in just a few weeks. Mandy looked brittle, thin around the mouth. Jeremy looked older, more so than the years between us would justify. They slid into the booth opposite me, and for a long moment we said nothing. The waitress came, we ordered coffee, and when she left, Mandy opened her mouth first. "We never meant for it to get that far," she began. "We thought we were protecting you." I held up my hand, not angrily but firmly. "Stop." My voice was quiet, even. "You don't get to start with justification. You start with truth." Jeremy looked at me, his eyes hollow. "We didn't think you'd fight back." The honesty stunned me more than any apology could have. I nodded slowly. That much is clear. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the food diary, the original one Mandy had given me, filled not with calories but memories, slights, small daily humiliations. I set it on the table between us. "Do you know what this is?" Mandy glanced at it, unsure. I flipped it open, read aloud. January 17th. Denied toast. Told I was forgetful. Refrigerator locked. Mandy said, "We'll make the decisions now." Jeremy nodded. No objection. I closed it. "Every day I documented your choices, not mine, yours." Jeremy swallowed hard. "We thought you were declining." "No," I said. "You hoped I was." It would have made things easier. Mandy's face twisted. "That's not fair." I shook my head. "Fair? You used my grief like it was a fog bank you could disappear into while taking what didn't belong to you. You made me feel like I was vanishing. You taught my grandson to mock me. You stood over me like a warden and called it love." My hands trembled, but not from weakness. "And the worst part is, I started to believe you. I started to think maybe I was broken, maybe I deserved less." I leaned forward. But I wasn't, and I don't, and I never will again. Mandy looked away. Jeremy just stared at the table. The silence between us stretched long. Finally, he said, "We'll return everything. Publicly, if you want. We'll sign whatever Lionel gives us." "Good," I said. "But that's not the point. You think this is about money. It never was. It's about dignity." I stood up, placed a 20 on the table for the coffee, and looked down at them one last time. "I don't want revenge. I don't need you to suffer. I want you to remember this. There was a line, and you stepped over it. If you'd asked for help, I would have given it. But you didn't. You took." I turned to leave. "From now on, I live where no one locks my food or my door. I live where I'm seen." I walked out of that diner lighter than I had felt in years. The air didn't change. The sun didn't break through clouds. No music played. But something inside me had settled. Something final. I wasn't just free, I was reclaimed. Not by them, not by the courts, by myself. I now live in a small rented cottage on the edge of Sandusky, tucked just beyond the reach of the lake's winds, but close enough that I can still smell the water on clear afternoons. It's quiet here, peaceful in a way I had forgotten was possible. The walls are mine. The thermostat listens only to me. The fridge hums politely, unlocked, undemanding, unobserved. I keep my own schedule, eat when I'm hungry, read when I feel like it, and let the silence settle without judgment. The first few mornings I still caught myself walking lightly, waiting for permission to move, to speak, to open a cupboard. Habits formed under pressure take time to loosen. But they are loosening. With every sunrise, I do not have to explain myself. I begin to breathe more fully. Dorothy helped me move in. She scrubbed the floors herself, unpacked my books, and arranged Loretta's blanket over the back of the recliner like it had always belonged there. She still calls every morning at 9 sharp, even though we're now only a few minutes' drive apart. She says she does it just in case. But we both know it's more than that. It's her way of reminding me that some kinds of care do not demand control, that attention can be love without surveillance, that help doesn't have to feel like handling. Jeremy and Mandy signed everything. The money was returned. The apology was issued publicly through the same channels where they once posted health tips and family photos. It was carefully worded, likely drafted by a lawyer, but it bore their names and an admission of harmful misjudgment and inappropriate boundaries. It made the rounds, raised a few eyebrows in the neighborhood. But I didn't need validation. I had never wanted them ruined. I had only wanted them to see what they had done, to look at it full in the face and know it could never be undone. I haven't seen them since the diner. Jeremy sends the occasional email, awkward and cautious, telling me about Connor's classes, the dog's health, his own cholesterol. I read them. Sometimes I even reply, briefly, politely. But a door once broken does not close the same way again. He is no longer the boy who ran down the hallway to greet me after school. He is a man I don't quite recognize. And that is something I've had to accept. Some nights I still wake suddenly, expecting the hum of a lock engaging, or Mandy's voice behind a closed door saying my name in that sweet, icy tone. But the house is always quiet. There are no cameras, no schedules, no lists. Just me, the moonlight on the hardwood, and the soft rustle of leaves outside the window. I rise, drink water freely, maybe make toast. Sometimes I talk to Loretta as I stand in the kitchen, telling her what I ate, how the tomatoes are finally coming in, how I bought a new bird feeder and the robins are back. I tell her I kept my word, that I didn't disappear, that I'm still here. The journal sits on my desk, filled end to end, a testament to the slow erosion of dignity and the even slower climb back to self. I still write in it, though now the entries are quieter. A good meal, a new neighbor, the sound of rain on the roof. I write because remembering matters, because erasure begins with silence, and I refuse to go silent. Not again. I've begun volunteering at the senior center in town. Nothing formal, just talking to folks, helping with tech questions, reading aloud to people whose eyesight has faded. They ask me why I came here, what brought me to this quiet town by the lake. I tell them the truth, but gently. I lived somewhere where I wasn't seen. Now I live where I am. Most nod. Some understand more than they say. We all carry versions of the same story, I think. Different details, same ache. To matter. I am 76 years old. I know what was nearly taken from me. I know how close I came to becoming a ghost inside my own name. And I know, now, more than ever, that dignity isn't granted by others. It's reclaimed in the quiet choices, the unlocked fridge, the spoken truth, the unshaken voice. I won't be erased, not while I can still speak, not while I still remember, not while I still write.